However, one of the things that we want to do tonight here at the place, we want to explore areas of what we call the Bible. I've said so many times to so many of my friends because they ask me if I love the Bible, and I do. But one of the things that I'm talking about when I refer to my Bible, because I have been repurposing many things in my life, especially over the last 20 years. When I say something about my Bible is actually my library. And so my library is actually my Bible. However, when we're dealing with Christianity's textbook, if you will, we're going to explore that tonight, and we're going to look at it for the sake of, so many of the people who actually send us emails. And so if you don't have our email address, it's simply info@newcovenantgroup.com. And one of the things that we're going to be doing over the next few months, simply to put together the kinds of conversations that work best. In other words, we're not talking about having conversations with people who are simply, wanting to throw people under the bus, but we want to have conversations with people who really want to look at this and that, people who want to become friends, really good friends. And so we're interested in moving forward with people who are more committed to the process than the conclusions. We're interested in people becoming compassionate. And so with that said, we're going to explore actually a couple of passages in light of a viewer that did send us his ideas or questions. And Bob, welcome to the show.
Hey, well, thank you. Great to be here. I've had a busy weekend, and I'm back home finally. Yeah.
You did have a busy weekend. Can you tell me something that was really, really powerful about the weekend that you had there at that? Was it a convention or what?
It was a kind of a retreat of a variety of people who meet once a year at this. It's actually a Salvation Army retreat facility, and they rent it out to various other people who use it for various weekends and things like that. A nice place, Lador. But anyhow, so these people gather there to take a look at a particular theological point of view that they share in common, even though they don't share all ideas in common. And I have been attending that retreat for over a decade, So, but I had a good time, and of course I've become the official sound recorder for the retreat. So I always take all my equipment that's necessary for a remote recording, and we record everything, clean up the recordings, make them available to the people who had attended, etc. But anyhow, it was fun. Powerful points. Hard to say. I usually get some interesting insight out of it in some ways, but I'd be hard pressed to say that there was something in particular that like hit me between the eyes or anything like that. So anyway, yeah. But it was good to see people that I've known for a while and to connect with them as we do once a year, and some good people. Enjoyed getting to know them.
Daryl, what say you? How have you been this Mother's Day weekend?
Well, yesterday was just pretty much a work day for me, and got a lot done, so that was good. But today was very relaxing, very enjoyable. I listened to praise and worship most of the day, but it's a little different. It was better than usual. It wasn't going toward someone that we're guessing at. It was going toward someone that I love dearly and have watched be one of the most amazing mothers that has ever lived. And she was reaping some of the benefits of that. A lot of praise being expressed toward her, and I think it was very appropriate. So it made it a really nice day.
So in other words, you gave your wife all the praise, honor, and glory forever, correct?
I sure did, and do.
That's awesome. That's awesome. You know, we had a fantastic event here in the studio this morning, and I think that the teaching was, was along those lines, exploring the commitment that mothers give to their children. It's in that sense of connection. It's in that sense of bonding that it's obvious. I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. You will always be my child. You don't need to be worried about me disconnecting from you, and so it's in that sense that we need to, and I admit this, we need to worship people in a true sense. In other words, adore them and just brag so much about them. And I love the heart of that kind of message. It's poetic, but it's good. It's good. With that said, I would like to tackle actually a question or two that is from one of our viewers. The gentleman makes a couple of good points and also asks a couple of good questions. And so, Bob, could you read those?
Sure, yeah. We got a question here from Walter. Walter, I'm not sure how he pronounces his last name, but Kasanas, perhaps, Kasanas or Kasanas, something like that. Anyway, we got a message from him through his email, which he said. He started off by saying, "I'm an atheist, and I am captivated by the messages of the New Covenant group. I was raised a Pentecostal Christian, and I have some questions." He says, "I'd like to know from the perspective of you guys what Jesus meant when he said he did not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it." And he had another question, but let's take a look at that first question from Walter.
I think it would be good to go directly to Matthew chapter 5. In fact, if you hear all the noise in the background, we live very, very close to the Naval Air Station here in Pensacola, and we're very, very thankful for it because, wow, we can just go outside and see these guys flying. And right now they're doing a flyby, and it's beautiful. But we are inside, and we're thinking about doing a few shows in the evening and also on Sunday mornings, early in the morning, outside, because the weather here in Pensacola is fabulous. The scenery in Pensacola is fabulous. And so we're planning on doing some shows at the beach, talking with people, getting back into that, remote type thing that we enjoy doing. And so we will be doing those shows soon. And so thank you guys for being so patient with us. But with that said, let's get into this kind of Bible. And then, in other words, feel the liberty to create whatever you want to, canonize whatever you want to. In other words, if your Bible is a list of books that make sense to you, feel good about that. But one of the things that I think that helps us all is to open up our minds, that is, to the idea that maybe the Apostle Paul was suggesting to Timothy. Perhaps all literature is inspired. In other words, we don't need to just look at what we've been raised with. We need to look outside of that box. Let's look at other writings. With that said, Matthew chapter 25, let's start with verse 17. It's an interesting passage. And I'm going to read from, actually, this Bible that's read, so it must be holy, but it's actually the Holman Christian Standard Bible. It's the one that most Baptists pontificate from these days, as I've been told. Okay, verse 17. "Don't assume that I came to destroy the law or the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill." Now, tonight we're not going to explore the Greek at all. And what we're going to do is we're just going to keep it English. And so please understand that this is a failed meta-language that we're dealing with. In other words, We're talking about a language about another language. And we've made the arguments on so many different shows that what we do have in English isn't the kind of representation that would give the authors of these books a smile on their face if they could actually read the text, because I think that we're really, really far away from actually recovering the intent of these particular authors for various reasons. We've talked about, the lack of indexical and deictic elements and all of that stuff, but that's not the show tonight. The show is simply we're dealing with what's in a particular meta language, and we're dealing with this particular English text tonight, and maybe subsequent other English text, emphasis English. Okay, verse 17. Once again, don't assume that I came to destroy the law or the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For I assure you, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter or one stroke of a letter will pass from the law until all things are accomplished. Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commands, I want you to pay attention to this, because you have this particular term, therefore. When you listen to a lot of teachers who really know their stuff, they will ask the question, what is therefore? You'll get the point in a minute. It may, be something that resonates with you in a few minutes. Verse 19, therefore, in other words, in light of what I've just said, where are we going with this? Whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teachings, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches people to do so will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. In other words, everything that he stated from verse 17 through verse 18, my goodness, if you actually do what? If you break one of the least of these commandments, and you teach other people to do so, you're going to be called least in the kingdom of heaven. And so if you break, the least of these things, you're not shoved outside of the kingdom. In other words, we need to pay careful attention to what Jesus is saying here. In other words, is he going to give a pushback, or is he in complete concert with the law? We're looking at this and reading that, wow, he's saying, don't assume that I came to destroy the law or the prophets. Well, is this a case of irony, or does he mean this literally? And so we're going to have to look at this. And so keep in mind what verse 19 is suggesting. Okay, if you teach someone, or if you break one of the least of these commandments and you teach people to do so as well, you're going to be counted least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches these commandments will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. So the question would be, is Jesus in this context, is he saying, wow, we need to keep these things? As if we continue to read, and then I want Bob to jump in, and then Daryl, verse 20 says, for I tell you, unless your righteousness surpasses that of the scribes and the Pharisees. And please keep in mind that the Pharisees are the major players. In other words, they are the sect that is in power right now. It would be like the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. Who's in power right now? The Democrats are in power. And so in this context, for I tell you, unless your righteousness surpasses that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. So he's talking about rising above, getting past what, the rhetoric is of the scribes and the Pharisees concerning righteousness, or you will never enter, quote unquote. And what does that mean? Is he talking about going to heaven, or is this just nuance? Here's the problem. The problem is, when you hear some of this language, you would assume that, wow, Jesus is coming along and he's saying, I'm not coming to abolish it or destroy it. I'm coming along actually to fulfill it. Well, if you keep reading, something raises some red flags. For instance, in chapter 5, verse 38, he states, you have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, don't resist an evildoer. And so the question would be, is he following the law or is he amending the law in this context? Verse 43 is another example of this. You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. In other words, is Jesus in this context, is he working in concert with the law of Moses, or is he transgressing the law? It's obvious that he's not suggesting that we keep the law intact. He's not saying let's keep, everything that the law is saying. He's actually saying let's look at it much differently and let's move on. In other words, I'm not in agreement with just loving your neighbors and that's it. I'm saying let's not do what the law is suggesting, in that we don't need to be hating our enemies. And so, is he contesting the law? Yes, he is. Is he amending the law? Possibly. Possibly. And so this is what we're talking about tonight. And so, Bob, what say you?
I think that Jesus is being a bit of a snot here, don't you?
Yeah, a real snot.
Yeah, I mean, now this is part of a long dialogue that he's having, and I think that you've hinted at something here, that Jesus telling them, now look, I don't want you to think something here, and he's setting them up for what he's about ready to say. And when you look at what he finally says, you can then, I think, see the snottiness of it all. But
Are you really saying that Jesus was a snot?
yeah, I am. But
No, he's not.
he was a nice snot. Do you know why I rarely crack any mucus jokes?
I'm all ears. I may have to grab a bottle.
Well, yeah, but no. Anyway, now I'm a little disappointed that you said we're just going to deal with English, because I see this as something that, in odd little nuances, the translation is deceptively inaccurate. Really.
I so agree with that.
But we're going to stick to the English. So let's do it in English if we can. Anyway, so Jesus says, don't think that I came to abolish the law. Now, there's several things you could do with the law. You can break the law. You can break the law so badly that we could figuratively say, oh man, that guy didn't just break the law, he abolished it. He broke every law in the book there. So this is really, really bad. And so I get the impression that you can take that in more than one way. Don't think I came to abolish the law. I'm not just going to break every commandment. I'm going to do something even more extensive than that. Could be the way it's taken. And particularly when he says, I'm going to fulfill it, that too could be taken in more than one way. And by the way, since it can be taken in more than one way, that's where the setup is. Jesus is leading you down the garden path. You think you're hearing one thing, and it's kind of like, that's the way the garden path discussions work. Somebody says something, it leads you down. You're on the way of thinking that he's going to say something, and then he says something that changes everything he was going to say. I did that the other day very deliberately. I was helping my brother-in-law move. And my wife and I are over there helping move. And I have bad arthritis in my legs, and sometimes it flares up. And when it does, I have a hard time, doing things. Anyway, I was there for a while, but then, my legs start really hurting, and I just had to stop. And he's telling me thanks, thanks for helping out. And I said, well, yeah, I sorry it worked out this way. I said, some days the legs won't hurt at all. I can do everything. And then there's some days my legs start to hurting, and it's just like it's hard to do anything. I said, but thank God that it happened today. It's just kind of kidding. But until I said, thank God that and therefore he thinks I'm going to be apologizing for it. And then I say, thank God, it happened today. So I'm saying, I'm glad I got out of all this work. But it's just a joke. But I'm kind of leading them down the garden path until I get to that joke. Well, Jesus is doing something similar here. He's taking you down the garden path. But notice that there's a few things that he doesn't say here. For example, he doesn't say, I'll tell you what, whoever does this, I'm going to call them with the worst in the kingdom. He didn't say that. He said, whoever, whoever breaks the least of these commandments and teaches people to do so will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. Now, if you know anything about the things that Jesus taught, this kingdom of heaven is interpreted by a lot of people as being, in the by and by, after we die. No. Jesus was talking about living in the presence of Abba, Father, now, and that eternal life was something we have now in knowing God, and that the kingdom of heaven, Jesus said, it's at hand. Just stick your hand out. You're in the kingdom of heaven. It's right there in front of you. Jesus was not preaching about the kingdom of heaven being something that will eventually arrive. It wasn't, so in this kingdom of heaven, don't you feel like this kingdom is awesome so far? He's saying, so if you're going to be doing things like this, they're not going to talk nice about you. They will not say nice things about you, And so then, after he sets this up, he starts down talking the law. He starts quoting Moses. I mean, if you know anything about the law, if you know anything about the Jews, Moses is like, there's not a single individual in all of the Hebrew faith who stands above Moses. So what does Jesus do? He quotes Moses, not once, not twice, 3 times, possibly even more, quoting something that we get from Moses and saying, you've heard it said? Well, I'm going to tell you something different, So Jesus doesn't abolish the law. He trashes it. I mean, he does something worse than just breaking all of its commandments. He negates it. He turns it into something of naught. He turns it into something you don't even have to worry about breaking. He turns it into something that you know what? Let's go do something else. And so now, I think that it does get translated in a way that leans one in the direction to think that this is what Jesus is asserting is so. And, and then so Christians hang this around their neck, and I heard something, well, you asked me earlier if I heard anything that was great to hear. One of the clever things that I thought I heard was one of the women there asked a question afterwards. Well, aren't we supposed to, obey God? And aren't we supposed to, always be doing the right thing and living, righteous lives? And the answer that this preacher gave, and by the way, I'm not quite into it the same way these other people are, but I do find what they talk about very fascinating. Anyway, so this preacher's answer is this: wait a minute. So if Jesus supposedly delivers us from all of this through his sacrifice, what you're saying is you'd rather take all this glory that is due Jesus away from him. And what he's really trying to say is, in a way that would hopefully offend the Christian who feels like they need to give glory to God, that this concept is really contrary to what appears to be the whole reason why we say Jesus came. He came to take away the sins of the world. He came to extend grace. He came to show God as a gracious God. He came, and we see clearly from other teachings that people who followed Jesus were, ready to nullify the law with its commandments, nail it to the cross, as it were. So I really do see this as Jesus getting a bit snotty, deliberately leading people down the garden path. And what happened is that some people just stayed there in that garden instead of realizing what Jesus did once he got you there. And so I would say that a careful reading of this indicates that Jesus pulled a 180 on you unexpectedly. And so therefore, when he pulls the 180, stop going where you thought he was going.
I've asked, I don't know how many people over the years, when you read these passages, like verse 43, you've heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. I've asked the simple question over and over again, isn't this in a sense a pushback on the Mosaic Law that is in your English Bibles? And most of them will simply hesitate and say, no, it can't be. I mean, there are no contradictions in God's Word, and I'm just, amazed at, this kind of cognitive dissonance that people get at that point in time. However, I do think that there are a few ways that we could explain this, and let me emphasize this. The explanations that we have of this are, it's possible that we really don't know the intent, namely of Matthew, nor of Jesus in this context. That's possible. We deal with what is likely and less likely. And let me put two things together that may be meaningful in this context. I think that Bob has put on the table something that I would agree with. I think that he's simply saying, when it comes to destroying the law, when it comes to fulfilling the law, I want you to look at it in this context. If a person teaches these commandments, they will be called great in the kingdom. However, if someone teaches people to break one of these commandments, they're not going to be thought of as great. And so I'm going to pick and choose. Do I want to be great in this kingdom that you have established in your mind's eye? I think he's saying, no, I don't want to be great. I want to be thought of as being the least in this kingdom. In other words, I'm willing to work within the modality of Judaism, but I don't want to be the greatest because this stuff just doesn't make sense to me. Therefore, count me as the least here because I'm going to push back on it. And so is he offering amendments to the law in this particular kind of context, especially with the meta-language here? I think that he is. However, there is another consideration that we can look at. If one says that is in the text, and this violates what I said earlier about sticking to English only, if we look at the manuscripts, both of Hebrew and of Greek, if Jesus is saying, don't assume that I came to destroy the law, that is, the fabric of the law was written in abjad form. Abjad means it's a consonantal text alone, without any vowel points. And one of the practices of the Jews was to revocalize, in other words, to supply whatever vowels they needed to a consonantal text to get out of it what they wanted. Therefore, it would be much like abstract art. What are you getting from it? Well, I'm getting this, whereas someone else is getting something quite different. And so he could have been saying, that is, if what is intended here is, I'm not going to destroy the law in its abjad form, nor the prophets in abjad form. I'm willing to work with abjad in that you can render it according to what the scribes and the Pharisees are suggesting, or you can look at another rendering where it might be a more reasonable expectation to life itself. And so that's a possibility. And so I look at this in two different ways. Either he's really pushing back on the law, rebuking these people, which is possibly more likely, or he's simply saying, I'm willing to put on the table a different rendering simply because the Abjad has, we've always done this traditionally, that is within Judaism, and so you guys shouldn't get so upset. However, that doesn't really work in concert with if you teach other people to do the same thing. When I read verse 43, if you're teaching other people not to hate your enemy, you're going to be counted least in the kingdom. And so in a sense, that leaves the idea of the Abjad, and it suggests more along the lines of what Bob is suggesting. Would you agree with what I'm suggesting, Bob?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we need to explore a wide variety of ideas. The reason why I have preferred the way that I offered it has to do with more than just trying to get that out of that particular text. And not that I'm suggesting we harmonize all of the different places that we find in the biblical text, but it doesn't appear that the early church took the direction that there was problems with that. The biggest problem they had, why Paul wrote the letter to the Galatians, some of the other issues that he had, the book of Romans, and talking about what this is all about, and even the book of Hebrews, and discussing the pros and cons of looking at what has changed in this old covenant versus this new covenant, is what indicates to me that Jesus was really reinventing the wheel here.
I agree. So you've heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I'm saying something quite different. That's being radical in a sense. You've heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I'm going to tell you something quite different. Okay? You need to love both neighbor and enemy. And so this is a powerful narrative. Daryl, what say you?
Can I make one more thing?
Sure.
I know we haven't let Daryl in, but I want to say one more thing about this, if I could. When Jesus said, don't think I came to abolish it, but I came to fulfill it. If there was an unreasonable standard of perfection that was offered, and we try to push that unreasonable standard of perfection to the limit, what's going to happen? Well, if it's an unreasonable standard of perfection, we're going to push it to the limit, and it's all going to fall apart. It's going to cave in on itself.
True.
And in a sense, it's not because it failed. It's going to be because an unreasonable standard of perfection, that falling apart, that's what that actually accomplishes. That is the fulfillment of an unreasonable standard. It falls apart.
That's good.
And so there's a sense here in which Jesus may be punning, that the way he fulfills the law is by showing you, this is what happens when you push it to the limit. And it all falls apart. It accomplishes exactly that which it's going to accomplish, given its unreasonable standard. Okay, so yeah, I'll let. Sorry, I just wanted to add that.
Hey, that was a great point. Go for it, Daryl.
Yeah, that actually leads into the thought that I had anyway concerning that term fulfillment or fulfill. Sometimes that idea is used when something is completed or it really doesn't serve any purpose anymore. And here they were, the thing that seemed to be important to them was their position in this kingdom. And he says, I'm going to fulfill this thing. I'm going to bring it to its logical conclusion, so to speak. And then, to say that unless your righteousness exceed that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you're not going to enter this thing anyway. Because, who really kept it? Who really, lived up to that, as you were saying, that unreasonable standard of perfection? Even to me, a good example is even though it's not used this way, is when the woman is caught in adultery. How is a woman caught in adultery without a man?
Yeah.
Why is there no mention of a man? Is that not part of the law, or was it just
Get caught. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, we also when he's talking about, unless you exceed the righteousness of the Pharisees, you can't enter the kingdom of heaven. Here, I think Jesus is being rather clever, to be honest with you, because remember what I said before. This is the kingdom of heaven. If you want to find acceptance among the Pharisees, you got to even be better than they are. That's their standard, And I get the impression that it's kind of like, man, these guys are so demanding that the only way you're going to enter into their environment is if you're like even more righteous than they are, and which is kind of emphasizing the unreasonable standard of perfection that's going on there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, is there more you think we should say about this particular question? Should
Well,
we move on to another one?
one of the things that I don't want to do, I don't want to bore people. I think that people are getting the point simply by reading the text. I mean, it's obvious that he's not trying to be the greatest in this context. He's not saying, let me speak to you, dear friends and loved ones. I'm going to work in concert with the establishment candidates. Moses and Abraham and the rest of those guys, he's pushing back on the establishment. And so it's in this context that he's saying, I don't mind being counted as one of the least.
So, in other words, you're saying he's like a Bernie Sanders or a Donald Trump. Just pushing back against the establishment.
I have something funny to say, but I don't think it would be appropriate on this show.
Okay.
What was the gentleman's name that asked the question?
Walter?
Walter.
Yeah.
Walter
Casanas, I think is his name.
He stated that his background was Pentecostalism, and I can't help but think of that. I'm somewhat familiar with that style of Christianity, if you will, and to me, it's kind of a reliving of this idea that I think Jesus is pushing back against. This unreasonable standard that nobody is really keeping, and yet they're expecting you, in order to participate in this thing, to keep it to a letter.
Yeah.
And, to see him turn it around on it, I think has got to be the proper way to see what's going on here in this text.
Yeah.
Turning it up on its heels.
Something's better when they're turned on their ear,
Right.
Should we go to the second question?
I think so, because this may demonstrate that I agree with some of the things that Jesus said and some of the things I don't. However, it's about exploring the possibilities of what these authors are suggesting. And please understand this. We're going to be dealing with the book of Luke chapter 14, and we're going to go back to the book of Matthew to make a point, because we may be looking through the eyes of aristocrats, not actually the apostles or the disciples, simply because we really don't have any of the contemporaries writing any of this stuff that is according to the evidence. In fact, we have people at a distance. And so this is just what they're saying. So let's not, get too uptight if it doesn't come out the way that you want it. And so with that said, go ahead and read that, Bob.
Yeah. And one little word of warning we should give people that, there's a certain group of people here in this world that are not going to be happy with you unless you're like really 10 times better than they are. Anyhow, so his second question was, why would he, meaning Jesus, why would he say we must hate our brothers and sisters and even our own lives, or else we're not worthy of him?
if I'm not mistaken, I think that he's referring to Luke chapter 14, verse 26. Let me read this. Let me read verse 25. It may put the setting together. Now great crowds were traveling with him, so he turned and said to them, if any man comes to me, listen to this, and does not hate his own father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. Now, there are subsequent.
I haven't been able to do as hard as I've tried. I just can't seem to do that.
Let's open the door for exploration here, and I may be jumping the gun, but I think he's referring to this passage, or am I wrong, Bob?
I'm sure he is. Yeah.
Okay.
It quite clearly mentions almost all the things there.
But to put some things in perspective, and I'm not saying try to harmonize Matthew with Luke. I'm not suggesting that, but just to give some of these aristocrats, some of these authors, the benefit of the doubt. Let's go to Matthew chapter 10, verse 32. Therefore, everyone who will acknowledge me before men, I will also acknowledge him before my Father in heaven. But whoever denies me before men, I will also deny him before my Father in heaven. Now, I taught on this the other day, and I'm not in agreement at all with Jesus on this point, and so I'm not going to teach actually what the Greek text is suggesting, but I shouldn't say actually, but what's likely there. But let's read verse 34. It says, don't assume that I came to bring peace on the earth. I get that point, and I do agree with that point. In other words, peace, edene here, he's not saying that I came to bring cessation of againstness, namely on this earth. That is in the context of you expecting peace. In other words, he's simply saying, I came not to bring peace, but a sword. In other words, I'm not in agreement with what you guys are doing, so I'm not going to advocate what you're doing. I'm simply saying that there is a metaphorical sword that needs to be applied, and hopefully there will be separation. And some of this stuff it does bother me. Disconnection bothers me. But yet at the same time, if it's stated poetically, I think that it speaks a valuable point. And here's what is stated in verse 35. For I came to turn a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and a man's enemies will be members of his own household. Now, if in doing this, if he's attempting to get people stimulated, that is to leave Jerusalem because Jerusalem is going to be destroyed, if he's trying to create, in a sense, people who are not saying praise God every 15 seconds about Judaism, and people who will simply say, I'm walking away from Judaism and I would rather flee into the mountains and start a brand new life, and I really don't care to live on property that we have now settled on that came by the means of genocide. I can see that would be a good thing. In other words, if you're going to stimulate people towards humility and toward the kind of honesty that says, this property that we are settled on, this came by the means of infanticide and genocide and so on and so on. Wow, Dad, Mom, Grandpa, Grandma, I need to leave this kind of craziness. And in doing so, you may construe me as an enemy, and therefore I'm going to sell whatever I have and try to give it back to those people that I hurt a lot of people. I've got to reconcile this, and so I've got to somehow reconcile all of this. I can't continue in this craziness any longer. And so if he's doing that, I applaud him. However, when we start reading in verse 32, I'm going to have to acknowledge him before men, before he can acknowledge me before my Father. That's not a reasonable expectation. I mean, sometimes people are not in a situation to where they can say X, Y, or Z. And I would hate to impose or place that on any individual. And so I find this to be maybe time sensitive.
I would want to suggest something perhaps a little different.
Okay,
here.
go ahead.
In this particular context, going back to Luke 14, Jesus had just previously told a parable about, somebody's got this banquet, and it's a great banquet. It's just going to be a great thing, And so he wants to invite all these people. And as all these people are being invited to this amazing banquet. And by the way, we're talking about living in a day where, food is not easy to come by. I mean, it's not that people aren't starving all over the place necessarily, but a great banquet is a real bonus, in that day for people, particularly if people are invited. Come on, no cost, just come on over. Well, and then these people begin making all these excuses. They're saying, "Oh, I just bought a field and I got to I got to go take a look at it." And somebody else says, "I just bought a yoke of oxen and." So you're just going to have to excuse me and so forth. And people are making excuses, and I think what Jesus is talking about is he is asking people to kind of look at the movement he's asking for, and he's getting a variety of people who are just walking away, and I think that Jesus says, "Oh my God, I'm telling you, in order to follow me, you're going to have to hate your mother and hate your, And I think Jesus is going into exaggeration mode here. I think he's talking about, look at the demands I'm making of people. This is excessive, and but I guess these are what I'm asking people of. I'm asking them these excessive things. I don't think that the same guy who's telling us, well, love your neighbor but hate your enemy is now saying, oh, but I want you to hate your brother and your sister, your mother, your father. If you're not going to be my disciple. But immediately after Jesus says that, he now goes, now look, suppose you want to build a tower. What are you going to do? The truth is there's going to be a cost in building that tower. And Jesus is, I think, acknowledging that there's going to be a cost. But the cost that he's talking about is not anywhere near as high as that absurd and ridiculous cost of hating your brother and your sister and your mother and your father. And so I really think that this is a burst of anger from Jesus. He's a bit frustrated over, and so he's exaggerating the drama queen kind of excuses that people give for not recognizing some of the other aspects of the message, what he's asking. So I really think that what Jesus is doing here is I think he is given deliberate hyperbole so that people who are listening to him in that day, unless you hate, they're going, what do you mean? That's not what you're demanding. And Jesus is thinking to himself, I know, I'm not demanding this. And yet people are treating me like that is what I'm demanding, And so I get the impression that there's really a mood or an attitude or an irony or something like that going on here. So that's my take on that particular section, given what appears before and what appears after it.
When it comes to hate, sometimes I think that in English we get this sense, especially in Romans, the book of Romans, one I hated, one I loved. I think that's too black and white. It's almost as if in that context there is a more nuanced point that's being made. I preferred one more than I did the other. It reminds me of when parents are raising their children. There is a a certain degree of preference that they certainly need to give to their children as opposed to the rest of the children on the block. That's healthy. And I think possibly it may be healthy in many of our lives in this context. And I'm simply saying that this may be possible. Maybe not likely, but possible. In chapter 14, verse 25, now the great crowds were traveling with him, so he turned and said to them, if any man comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. It could be true that the narrative, namely of everyone that these individuals were around, was so messed up, so much in chaos, that Jesus was simply saying, in order for everything to work out for father, mother, brother, sister, sons and daughters, in order for that to work out, you're going to have to prefer not so much me, but you're going to have to prefer the things that I'm saying. In other words, I can see that in the day of Martin Luther King Jr., that many people had to leave the narrative of father, mother, brothers and sisters, aunts, uncles, etc. And they had to prefer Dr. King's message of I have a dream, and they took that, poetically speaking, and it helped them to move out of their particular modality into something much richer and better. It wasn't like, let's go from here to there and then everything's marvelous, wonderful. But in a sense, they were, practicing something that we call being transitional. And in doing this, there was much preference, if that makes any sense.
I think there was that going on too, definitely. Yeah. I just don't know if that's what Jesus may have been referring to in this one particular.
I agree. I'm just saying that is a possibility, because sometimes people will use extremely, when you look at the Greek here, you see things in contrast. And I keep saying that, the Apostle Paul, he's the one who does all of this juxtaposition styled writing. And he places things in contrast. And what you do see in the context here, you see some hard things being stated. One could see this as powerful nuance in order to make a point for the people, to give them a point of movement. When we take this in a literal sense in English, we fail to get what's being stated actually.
Yeah, I can see that. However, I think that, and I'm saying this just from the standpoint of certain Christian theological positions. The Christian position traditionally, by and large, has been that Jesus went to the cross so that you didn't have to. And so, this take up your cross thing, it could be more of that pushing to the limit that, according to in Christian doctrine, Jesus ends up taking all of that upon himself. He pays the price. He suffers the cross, not you. And so I think an argument could be made that that this is just poorly written juxtapositioning that doesn't come through clearly enough. I think that argument could be made.
Okay, but think about the possibilities when we talk about staru. Okay, we're talking about this idea of wow, this is something, anyone who is placed on that tree, that torture stake, if you will, he's cursed of God.
Yeah.
And it's like, if you pick up a cross, if you pick up this torture stake, and symbolically so, you're going to be thought of as being God damned. And so it's like he's encouraging people. If you want to be in the position where everyone in your family will feel like you're God damned, pick it up,
Yeah,
own it. And because
sure.
what I'm inviting you to do, I'm actually inviting you to explore humanity. Humanity
Right.
is not over here and God is over there. It's like, why keep the separation alive? In other words, let people simply pick up this message of, yeah, I'm cursed of God, I'm cursed of God. Let good people pick up that and say, yeah, I'm cursed of God, I'm cursed of God. Look at me, that's what I am, and put it in their face, confront them with that, and things change. For instance, in verse 28, he says, for which of you wanting to build a tower doesn't first sit down and calculate the cost to see if he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, after he has laid the foundation and cannot finish it, all the onlookers will begin to make fun of him, saying, this man started to build and wasn't able to finish. In other words, he's simply talking about some kind of narrative that made better sense than the other. And these people were trapped in the narrative of the Mosaic Law and the prophets, and they were starving for something that would set them free. And he's simply saying, hey, don't be afraid of being looked at as being God damned or as the
Or
ones who are
he's
cursed
admitting,
of God.
yeah, he's admitting that there's perhaps a bit of a catch-22 if you're going to follow him.
Certainly.
You're damned if you do, damned if you don't. So,
And so it's like saying, I don't mind being a heretic or one hated. I'm willing to bear that. And so it's not like bear the cross, let me die for your sins, and that kind of sick theology. I don't think
one of
that's
the things
what's
I think
being
we need to do for
stated
Walter,
here.
one of the things I think we need to do for Walter Canassis is that, of course, in our opinion, the biblical text is not necessarily something we consider to possess this kind of authoritarianism. And so we're not above or beyond the possibility of looking at some of the biblical texts as being, just something that you don't read it, it's just, there's some stuff in there that's not so great, and because it is a book with much mixture in it. It's admixtured with various different things, and as a result, as any work that might contain that kind of admixture, yeah, so what? Find something bad, just move on, read the next paragraph.
I think there always been a tendency, though, for people to, anytime somebody comes along and tries to stir things a little, tries to bring about some change, that they're counted as hate mongers.
Oh, yeah.
And, how many times, and I wonder how many times it was stated even in the first century, when, someone is so radically, or at least seemingly positioning themselves against everything that the family or the clan or whoever it might be has always believed and always supported. And they seem to be positioning themselves against it. And then the response is, why do you hate me so?
Jesus makes a statement in Mark chapter 4, verse 10. It says, when he was alone with the 12, those who were around him asked about the parables, and he answered them, the secret of the kingdom of God has been granted or given to you. But to those on the outside, everything is stated in parables, so that, now listen to this. In other words, Jesus admits to being parabolic. And here's why. He said, so that they may look and yet not perceive. They may listen and yet not understand. Otherwise, they might turn back and be forgiven. There is some strong language in the context of the entire Gospels. And I think that we would be wise, that is, to leave enough room for sarcasm, for
Oh, yeah.
all kinds of things that a person could say to say, let me rub you the wrong way. For instance, one of the things that I really admire about Martin Luther King Jr. is that he said things that would really piss off the establishment. And in doing so, he put it in a context of poetry, and he could get away with it. People were angry, could really misrepresent what he said. But if what Martin Luther King Jr. stated would have been without video, I think that we would be rendering Martin Luther King Jr. much differently today. And this is why I really caution people, let's not get too excited about anyone's rendering of the text. I mean, we lack so many things. We lack so much of the non-linguistic evidence or elements that are essential for doing the kind of analysis that would produce a likely intent, and that would take syntagmatic and paradigmatic analysis. And so with that said, we're not going to go any further with the show because I think that we got to the point. But we would like all of our friends that really enjoy this show, please, take the time to email us. That is at info@newcovenantgroup.com, because we have some exciting news for you. Because one of the things that we want to do, we want to start actually a great conversation, not just in video form, but also in written form, also by getting on, namely possibly a telephone, like a cell phone or smartphone, whatever you want to call it, and also maybe on Skype or in a Google Hangout, because we want to form meaningful community. And yet at the same time, we're not willing to put relationships that is at risk by simply saying, let's have the kind of platform that just invites all the crazies into the room. One of the things that I have found with Bob Graves and I, we talk to each other every day, and our relationship is really, really close. The same thing is true with Daryl and so many of the people here in the studio and also in other areas of the United States. But one of the things that we don't have in our lives, we don't have a lot of people trying to throw us under the bus. In other words, we're looking for people who are really interested in building meaningful community, people who are interested in becoming a part of a movement, if you will, who will simply say, I'm not looking for perfection, but I'm looking for people who will love, that is, be compassionate, people who would like to explore whether there is a God or isn't. In other words, atheists and theists alike. But we're not really interested in people who would come in just to destroy. That doesn't make sense. And so my wife and I, we enjoy a wonderful life together. Our conversations are deep. I can't say enough. I can't brag enough about her. I worship her. She's my God. She's my Lord. She's my everything. But I don't have someone sitting in the room with me all the time just trying to bash me and bash her. I refuse to live like that. And so I pick and choose to be around people who will give me enough time to say this and that so I can be understood, because I think that all of us have been on a journey that means a lot to us, and we have things to share. And it takes time to share everything that you would like to share with people you love. And so with that said, let's be kind, let's be patient. Let's see if this can work out, and I think that it can. And so we're changing a lot here at the New Covenant Group, here at the place, and it's for the benefit of humanity. And I think that it's going to require that you have movements that have people, with a lot of integrity, a lot of patience, a lot of kindness, with a heart that gives. And this is why we enjoy so many of your questions. We love getting into the Bible. We love getting into various other ideas in the consideration of the conversation of the great debate and outside of the great debate. So with that said, Bob, I want you to make one of those golden nugget points tonight, because you do it so well. Go for it. No pressure. You're muted. You're still muted.
The pressure's on. Um, you know, Jesus is a person I think is misunderstood by theist and atheist alike, and I'm not so sure that the way that I have tried to perhaps sometimes see him in a good light or criticize something. I don't know that my view is an accurate view of what was really being put forth. These things are perhaps in some ways debatable or arguable. But I think it's worth exploring. And I also think it's worth asking questions like what Walter did, because, I mean, on the face of it, depending on how you take those questions, the last thing we need are people who, and I'm sorry, but we have it. We have a lot of very religious people who are reading some of these things of Jesus that can be taken quite horribly. And they take them quite horribly, and they believe that's what's right. That's sad. They have not, they're justifying something that is obviously accepted out of fear. Speaking of fear, you mentioned Dr. Martin Luther King. He chose his words very, very carefully in order to communicate things concerning his dream. I mean, he did say things like, I have a dream that that white men and black men that we would sit down and eat together as brothers. A wonderful picture of showing an end to hostility and all that. There's some things he didn't say that are part of his dream. I think that Martin Luther King had a dream that interracial marriage would become part of what would be an acceptable thing, not necessarily a trend, but an acceptable thing. But he didn't say, I have a dream that your daughters will marry our sons. That might not have gone over so well at the time. But at the time, he's really trying to recommend with great strength this dream that brings an end to these hostilities. And that's not an easy thing to do. He had a hard time working at it. He didn't succeed in every way he had hoped to, and it actually even cost him his life to get as far as we did. So I think it's an unreasonable standard of perfection that we might bring to Jesus, to expect that everything that he said was going to be something we liked. And in order for him to be perceived as a person who may have really been trying to change things for the better.
Can you say one more thing? I've got a surprise.
Okay, one more thing. I kind of that was the last synaptic connection I had for the evening. So I'm not, I don't know.
You don't know?
No,
well, I mean, come on.
After I say my most awesome thing, I start going to sleep, and I just
Drained. That's good.
I'm running out of power. I'm just kidding, but you see, I like surprises. Well, I like some surprises.
We don't have the surprise yet. We were going to surprise everyone, but I guess we're not going to do that yet. Hold on for a second.
I will say something if you need a little more time. I just wanted to say that, this, to me, this is such a better way to look at this book. I find that it seems these days there's basically two categories of people or viewpoints toward the Bible. And one is, it is just so important, and it made me think of what was just stated toward Bob, no pressure. The viewpoint that this is God's word and we've got to keep it, etc. So much pressure involved, so much, it just puts the intention is to put a person in a pressure cooker. And then when people discover that shouldn't be the case at all, a lot of them just want to take it and toss it and they develop maybe not a hatred for it, but somewhat of a disdain. I think it's nice to be able to sit down, look at it, talk about it, no pressure, enjoy it. The possibilities, maybe we've misread some things. Uh, Maybe we can glean some things that we've never seen before because we were locked into a certain pressurized position. But to be able to just relax and talk about it and, consider the possibilities, I'll have to say, I think that's nice.
Sure.
I personally enjoy it.
Now, you guys are making a lot of sense tonight, but we had a surprise, but it's not going to work out tonight. And so, oh, wow.
Disappointed.
Yeah. Now. No,
Do what?
Bob, not even going to sleep good tonight.
Right. I just woke up. I felt like I was going to get a candy bar, and now I find out. What's going on?
I thought that I could get Rick on the djembe and we were going to do something, but that's just not going to happen tonight, guys. That would have been fun. I mean, the guy is awesome on the djembe. I was hoping that I could pick up a guitar and we could do something and have some fun, but that's not going to happen tonight. But maybe next show. Yeah, maybe next show. With that said, we're getting out of here, and please remember, send us your thoughts. We want to hear from you, and that's at info@newcovenantgroup.com. We are getting ready to launch some amazing good stuff.
Adam, my son, come in. Sit down. Make yourself comfortable. Thank you for coming on such short notice. I realize that it's an inconvenience for you, but it was necessary. How have you been? Let me take a look at you. You're looking good. Oh yeah, you're looking real good with the face and the two eyes and the thing here, the nose. You're a beautiful man. I did a good job when I made you. You hungry? You want something to eat? We got a calzone, spaghetti, lasagna, spaghettios. We got the Hot Pocket. Have you seen these things? They're easy and quick to warm up, and they taste delicious. No? All right. How's Eve doing? Is she working out for you? Hey, listen, I'm sorry about that rib, but it had to be done. Is it still sore? You feeling better? Good. How's she working out for you? She's a pretty good helper? Yeah? Good. I'm glad to hear it. I thought that she would be good. You thirsty? You want something to drink? We got some water, some wine, maybe, some cognac. We got these new juice boxes. Have you seen the juice boxes? They're like about that tall, and they got the straw on the side, and you take the straw and you poke it in the top, and you got instant juice. You want some of that? No? You're not thirsty at all? You look nervous, Adam. Relax. You're making me nervous, and that's no good. Just settle down. It's me, your father. How's the animal naming going? Have you got them all named yet? I like the lion one. That was a stroke of genius, I must say, because a lion, rah. I hear it in the name, lion. It's nice touch. And the squirrel, that cute little thing with eating the nuts, and you call it a squirrel? It's brilliant. And I want to say that to people. You're getting squirrely on me, it works. I love it. Are you sure you're not hungry? You're looking a little skinny. You want some dessert? We got some chocolate cake. I know you like chocolate. No, you don't want no chocolate cake? Okay. How about some fruit? You want some fruit? Maybe a banana? Maybe a strawberry? Maybe an apple? You don't want an apple? Come on, Adam. Who you think you're talking to? I know you like apples. I hear things. I see things. I know that you like apples. Don't lie to me. Adam, don't lie to God. I know what you did with my tree. You know, I don't know what to do with you anymore. You're making me very... Got a lot of this going on inside, you know. I love you with all my heart. I took the dirt and I made you with my own hands. I blew life into your nostrils. And then I saw that you were lonely, so what did I do? I made a beautiful woman to help you. And you guys needed something to do, so I made you a luscious garden. And fruit just bloomed from the trees and came up from the ground. Everything that you could want. I made animals that you could name. And I made you king of the world! My world! And I ask one thing of you. One simple thing. Don't touch my tree! And what do? I'll tell you what you did. You and your woman let a snake talk you into betraying me! And now you put me in a very difficult situation. Because you have made me look like a fool. So what would you do if you were in my place? Adam, you disgust me. So I'll tell you what I'm gonna do. You like apples? Fine. From now on, you're gonna have to grow them yourself! You like making your own choices? You like doing your own thing instead of what your father tells you to do? Fine, you're gonna have to do it yourself. You like this pretty garden? You're never gonna see it again. You are under a curse, my friend. And your children are under a curse. You like living? Well, forget about it, because you're gonna die. And your children are gonna die. And your wife is gonna die. And your children's children are gonna die! I'm sick of you. You, get out of my face. Give me something to clean this up. Because you're gonna work for the rest of your life. Put some clothes on. That fig leaf is not fitting of you. Get out of my sight and get to work. No, wait a minute. Get back here. Don't walk away from me. Sit down. You leave when I tell you to leave. I had such wonderful plans for you, Adam. How could you do this to me? You broke my heart, Adam. Get out of my face! Get out! Right, go! What are you doing? Sit down! You break everything, my friend. My son, my former son. Get out of my face! I don't even know what to do with you. Yes, I do. Get out of here. You're not welcome. I don't want to see you again. You look like an idiot in that leaf. Put some decent clothes on for my sake.
Okay,
Yes.
Yes.